Hey everyone, in this video we're diving deep into how to build a deck in Homecoming, focusing on two topics: gold and bronze distribution and provision cost usage, utilizing the current archetypes, and as part of the second topic we will also take a look at each faction and what mechanics we can use to fuel our deck. Subscribe if you want to see more videos like this, and let's go! There are only 3 limiting factors to deck building in Homecoming. You need to have at least 25 cards, you must not use more than 165 provisions, and each card may only appear once in your deck, except for bronze cards, of which you can have 2 copies in your deck. Each card has a provision cost, and typically gold cards are stronger, therefore also their provision costs are higher. But bronze cards serve as the basis of each of the deck's identities, so you want to use a lot of them in your deck anyways. Distribution-wise, I suggest something like 8 to 12 gold cards and 13 to 17 bronze cards, so you could aim for 10 golds and 15 bronzes and see where you land. Provision-wise, this would grant you 9 provisions per gold card and 5 provisions per bronze card. If you put in a card that requires more provisions, then keep in mind that another card needs to require less, so you manage to stay within the provision limit. Before you start building your deck though, you also need to be sure about what the deck's going to be about. In the current version, it is sometimes hard to support a deck only focusing on one specific archetype because of the lack of cards for that archetype. So in deck building we need to choose option 1 is to focus on only one archetype or deck concept while you fill up the remaining card slots with tutor and filler cards. In the mulligan, you try to draw the filler cards so you can drop them on the board in round 1 and then utilize the tutor cards to access the remaining cards. Or if you got a leader with a lot of mulligans, you can also wait for round 3 to mulligan them back into the deck. Ideally, these fillers are also control cards like Elsa's Thunder or Bomb Heavers, which give you options during the match by being able to deny key cards of the enemy. Option 2 is to build a deck around 2 archetypes at the same time. This sounds a bit clunky, but thanks to the current round length and card draw, this is actually fine. Typically you see 19 or more cards of your deck during a match, so the chance to draw the critical cards of your strategy is quite high, especially if you add some tutor cards. Thanks to this, you can pull off one archetype in round 1 or 2, while you pull off the second archetype in round 3. Of course, you should also try to break out of this archetype thinking while combining archetypes and mechanics in a new and refreshing way, but especially at the beginning it is beneficial to think inside the box of those archetypes. This is why we now take a look at each faction, highlighting the possible archetypes and combinations you can do with them. A big thanks to McBeard at this point. I'm going to use his descriptions and naming of the faction mechanics, and if you want to dive deeper, there's a chance to check out his faction videos as well, where he really goes into detail of each one. Now let's start with my personal favorite, NILFGAARD. NILFGAARD cards are all about control and interacting with your opponent, using mechanics like reveal, spies, buffing the enemy, tactic cards and locks. Reveal is not the same as it was once, and now it's all about revealing random cards in your deck to trigger additional effects. Spies are units that are being played on your opponent's side of the board, and currently there's not much synergy available for them except cards like Imperial Enforcer, who gets charges to do damage when an enemy spies appears. Cards that buff the enemy are interesting because you can make the enemy stronger for the moment to then Emir with his reset cards, or use cards like Nausicaa Brigade, who deal damage to buffed units. You can also tech cards like Scourge, Dudu and Co. to play with this mechanic. Tactic cards and locks are pretty straightforward, so I'm not going to linger here. scoia'tael. scoia'tael still uses mechanics like hand buff and ambush, while they now also really care about what type a unit is: elf, dwarf, dryad, or a good mix of them. Also they play a lot with boosts and artifacts, traps, because each trap is also an artifact. Creating hand buff units works the same as ever, while a lot of the units have deploy effects like when this unit is already boosted, do X. Hand buff, for example, is excellent to combine with another archetype like dwarves or elves, because cards can be hand buff but an elf at the same time. Scoia'tael. Scoia'tael is really into dealing damage regardless of where the units are placed on the board, while they also keep mechanics like discard and resurrection. Bloodthirst is a new keyword in Homecoming and only triggers when the enemy has a certain amount of damaged units. Soldiers of Skellige often have effects when they become damaged as well, so those two archetypes combined into a deck together with a unit that can deal damage already sounds pretty consistent. Discard and Resurrection also work hand in hand, especially with leaders like Bran, where you get free discard per round, enabling you to control what's left in your deck and your graveyard at the same time. Monsters. Homecoming breathed new life into the faction by adding new mechanics like Thrive and Supremacy, while expanding on mechanics like Deathwish, Consume and Swarm. Thrive buffs a monster whenever a bigger monster is played on the board, while the Supremacy mechanic triggers an effect when you control the biggest unit on the board. Note that Supremacy is not an actual keyword in the game itself though. Consume and Deathwish were two parts of the same coin, but in Homecoming, you can trigger Deathwish units without actually consuming them, and consuming also makes sense on non-Deathwish units, especially when you try to play with the Swarm archetype or you need to achieve Supremacy. Northern Realms. Northern Realms archetypes are all about charges, seal, mechanics, soldiers, and spectres. Machines do not have a deploy effect anymore. Instead, they use order abilities that can be triggered whenever there is a charge available. This is the same for a lot of soldiers, and luckily there are many cards that can move, add, or double charge on the unit. Using seal, you're also able to execute your order abilities before the enemy locks or destroys your units. Summarized, let's say, try to go with 10 gold and 15 bronzes, while using on average 9 provisions for gold and 5 provisions for bronze cards. Focusing on 1 or 2 archetypes is both valid for deck building, and every faction has more than one way to combine all the mechanics, so start by following the apparent combinations, and the more experience you have, the more you can try to experiment with new combinations. If you liked the video and you want to see more, then hit the subscribe button. As soon as we know more of the game, I'll start again with my weekly deck guide series. Until then, you'll probably see more videos like this. Thanks for watching.